Hey guys, we're here today to talk about Stasis Theory, which is a really useful organizational tool now that you're moving into the thick of Unit 1. But let's start off with an example. You're trapped in a friendly debate with two other friends. You want to see the movie Incredibles 2 tonight. It's a Friday night, let's say. But friend 2 wants to go out and see Black Panther. For some reason, they haven't seen Black Panther yet. And friend 3 says, watching movies is a waste of time. When we've got that paper due soon in our rhetoric class, it's more important for us to use this Friday night to study. So, how do you resolve this debate? Which friend should you try to persuade first? I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to answer this question, but of course teachers feel free to pause this video if you want to talk about it more in class. Okay, what did you decide? This is kind of like a logic puzzle, right? Well, it doesn't make sense to start by persuading friend 2 to go see The Incredibles. Because even after you do all that work, friend 3, the one who wants to spend the night studying, might still persuade you not to go to the movies at all, right? It makes much more sense to start by persuading friend 3 that going to the movies is the best plan of action for your evening. And then, when everyone is in agreement on that idea, figuring out which movie to see, whether you should see Black Panther or Incredibles 2. If you've ever taken part in a debate like this, you've used stasis theory to help resolve it. Stasis comes from a Greek word that means standing or at rest. And we use stasis theory to find the place in an argument or a controversy where agreement stops. That is, where agreement sort of comes to rest. Stasis theory has 4 different levels. And the theory tells us that every controversy has these 4 different levels where people can disagree. The first level is conjecture or existence. The second level is definition. The third level is quality. And the fourth level is action or policy. And don't worry, we're going to go into these in more detail in just the next few slides. But stasis theory works like a funnel. It starts with the broadest questions, does something exist? And it moves towards the most specific questions, what should we do about it? So you always have to go through these 4 levels of questions in order to resolve any kind of controversy. Okay, let's take a deeper look at that first level or question. These are questions at the level of conjecture, as they happen in public arguments. The basic question of conjecture or existence is, does it exist? Did it happen? So the first thing everyone has to agree on is, does this thing exist? Did this thing happen? Is it the truth, or is it only an opinion? Where did it come from? How did it begin? What is its cause? And can it be changed? Those are all sort of corollary questions that spring off of this idea of wondering whether or not this thing exists or happened. That's the basic question of stasis that everyone has to agree on. The next level is questions at the level of definition. So this question is basically, how can the act or the event be defined? And the corollary questions for that are, what kind of thing or event is it? To what larger class of things does it belong? What are its parts? How are they related? How would we categorize this thing that's happening? Now that everybody agrees that this thing does exist, what is it? How can we define it? Everyone has to agree on this level before we can move on to the next level in order to resolve an argument. And this level is questions at the level of quality. So the question here, the main question is, what is the character of the act? Meaning, is this a good or a bad thing? Is this the right thing to do, or is it the wrong thing to do? Is it better than something else, or is it worse than the alternative? And lastly, is it more or less important than something else? In the final level, if we agree on all those levels and we really want to resolve a controversy, are questions at the level of action or policy. So questions of policy boil down to, what should we do? Should some action be taken? What actions are possible or desirable? How will these proposed actions change the current state of affairs? And how will these proposed actions make things better? So every argument lives at these 4 levels. Every argument has questions of conjecture, questions of definition, questions of quality, and questions of action or policy. When all the arguments in a controversy take place at one and only one of these levels, we say that the controversy is in stasis. When different parties in a controversy are arguing at different levels of stasis, we say that the controversy is out of stasis. This is an important idea, so I want to go over it really quickly one more time. If there are questions if everyone is arguing about a question of definition, how do we define this thing? Whether or not people agree on how to define this thing, and they won't if they're arguing, we can say that the controversy there is in stasis, because everybody is arguing at the same level and at the same place about the same basic question. How do we define this thing? However, if some people are arguing about questions of definition, how do we define this thing? And other people are arguing about questions of action, what do we do about this thing? How do we solve this thing? We would say that that controversy is out of stasis, because all parties are not arguing at the same level about the same question. Only controversies that are in stasis can be resolved. All that seems a little theoretical. So let's go back to our original example, thinking about this Friday night, should we go to the movies or not? So, what levels of stasis are being argued by you and your friends? Again, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to think about this, but of course feel free to pause the recording and talk about this with your classmates. Okay, we're back. If you said there are arguments at the level of quality and at the level of action or policy, good work, you got this correct. Why is that? Well, first off, everyone in your group agrees that movies exist. So there's no argument at the level of conjecture. You don't have a crazy friend who's saying there's no such thing as movies. Also, everyone in your group agrees on how to define them. There's no argument at the level of definition. You guys all agree that when you say we want to go see a movie, you want to go see a movie in theaters, not you want to go over to a friend's house and turn on a computer and download a film, right? So in this case, there's no argument at the level of conjecture because you have broad agreement. There's no argument at the level of definition. Where there is argument is in the questions of quality. Is there something better to do with your time? Is it more worthwhile to spend our Friday night working on our rhetoric paper? And of policy or action. What movie should we see? How should we fulfill this goal of seeing a movie? So your debate is out of stasis because you're arguing at 2 different levels. You're arguing the question of quality with friend 3, and you're arguing the question of policy or action with friend 2. To resolve it, you'll first have to get your argument in stasis. So first off, you have to persuade friend 3 to see a movie. You have to resolve the question of quality, proving that the best use of your Friday night is to go see a movie with your friends. Only then can you resolve the argument, because you've now put your argument into stasis. Now all 3 of you are debating what movie should we see. That's the only way that you can resolve this. Okay, so this is kind of a fanciful and a fairly simple argument to resolve at stasis. Let's take a look at what happens when we deal with a real-world argument that's active in all the levels of stasis. So let's talk about the controversy over global climate change. And what I've done is I've just cut in a couple headlines. This took me maybe 10 minutes of research to find these headlines. And we can see that climate change is a controversy that's happening at all these different levels. First off, at the level of conjecture, here we can see a headline from Tom Coburn, from Alex Brown, saying Tom Coburn labels himself a global warming denier. Now you guys, of course, will notice this is not an opinionated headline, right? This is a headline that's just reporting on facts. This is what Tom Coburn has labeled himself. That's a fact. This is not an opinion piece. So when you're writing essay 1, of course, a headline, you wouldn't want to use a resource like this. But anyways, Here we have an example of someone arguing at the level of conjecture, right? Tom Coburn is saying there's no such thing as global warming. It doesn't exist. I'm a global warming denier, he claims. At the next level, the question of definition, there are people arguing over whether global climate change is natural or man-made. And here we can see someone making the argument that global warming is, in fact, natural, predictable climate change. So we can see that someone here is arguing about the question of definition. Is this man-made? No, he claims. This is natural, predictable climate change. Here's an argument at the level of quality by Alex B. Berezov, who says that climate change isn't the world's biggest problem. And this is actually a fairly common argument against solving global climate change at the level of quality. Many people argue that global poverty is more important than climate change, and it's something that we need to address first. So they're making an argument about quality. Something else, they're saying, is more important or more pressing for us to deal with. And lastly, of course, there are arguments about policy. And here we can see just two people disagreeing in the myriad numbers of ways that we think about solving global climate change. Here, Sam Dimitriou says that a carbon tax is the best way to halt climate change, and it could boost the economy too. Whereas Sergei Nedesin says carbon taxes may not be the best solution for a greener planet. So we can see, looking over these two slides, and I'm going to skip back to the first one here for just a second, we can see that there are, in fact, arguments at every level of stasis here. And if we wanted to resolve the problem of global climate change, which we do, the first thing we would have to do is get everyone to agree that it is, in fact, something that exists. We'd have to get rid of public figures who are global warming deniers and persuade them that this is indeed a pressing problem. Then we would all have to agree on a definition. We would all have to agree that global climate change is man-made and can therefore be solved by people. We would all have to agree at the level of quality. We would all have to agree that global climate change is the most pressing problem, the biggest problem for us to address. And lastly, if we were redders who wanted to solve this problem, only then could we advocate our own policy. Only then could we say, this is the best way to solve this problem. So stasis theory is a great way to get to know the controversy better. It's a great way to find out the areas where people are arguing. When you yourself are making an argument, you need to think through all the levels of stasis so that you can be as persuasive as possible. But it's also a great organizational strategy for the upcoming essay 1. That's the mapping essay, remember. If your controversy is not in stasis, and many controversies in the real world are not in stasis, you can use the levels of stasis to organize the body of your paper. So you can think, I'll have a paragraph talking about the level arguments at the level of definition, let's say. And then within that paragraph, you can discuss who agrees, who disagrees, right? Who says, this is how we define it, who offers a different definition. And you can go on, right? You can then say my other two arguments are both at the level of policy. One says that we should do solution X. The other one argues for solution Y. So stasis theory is not only practical, it's not only useful, but it's also just a great tool for success in this upcoming essay 1. Okay, that's everything about stasis theory for today. Make sure to take the quiz, and we'll return and talk more soon.